When one overlooks the site of the Forum of Nerva, one of 6 Imperial Roman forums, there isn't much to see, except for a couple of columns, some decorative entablature above the columns, and a length of wall. Sections of marble discovered from archaeological excavations nearby are neatly laid out around the ruined forum. However, the forum looked drastically different only 500 years ago, when the relatively well-preserved ruins of the Temple of Minerva were still standing. We're currently standing behind the Forum of Nerva, and the raised platform built from stones and bricks represent the foundations of the Temple of Minerva, the only surviving section of the temple. The forum was the 4th and smallest imperial forum to be built. Its construction began under Emperor Domitian before AD 85, but it was officially completed and inaugurated by his successor, Nerva, in AD 97, bearing his name. For 4 centuries, the forum served as a monumental entrance and interconnecting hub between several other larger forums. The plan of the Forum of Nerva is long and narrow, with protruding columns decorating the walls instead of arcades. A temple dedicated to Minerva dominated the western end, behind which was a monumental entrance. Using Rome Reborn, available on Yourscape, we can see in great detail the forum as it was in its prime, its dimensions, and its role as an interconnecting monumental forum. This diagram shows how the forum served as a monumental entrance to other larger forums. As we can see, the Forum of Augustus is immediately to the left, with half of its right still existing exedral wall pressing against the Temple of Minerva. Out of all temples of the 6 imperial forums, aside from the Temple of Antonius Pius and the Temple of Romulus in the Roman Forum, the Temple of Minerva was the best preserved until the Renaissance, when Pope Paul V ordered its demolition in 1606 to provide materials for the Aqua Paola fountain on the Janiculum Hill. These well-known series of images shows the forum in its prime compared to its state in the Middle Ages, with smaller settlements now occupying the once former open public space. The next series of etchings at the turn of the Renaissance depict the temple's state of preservation in the 15th and 16th century, showing it to be relatively well preserved. It would have appeared this way to the Italian Renaissance artist Raphael, while conducting his survey of Rome's surviving ancient monuments around 1515. Raphael even appealed to then Pope Leo X to plead to preserve, quote, "what little remains of the ancient mother of Italy's glory and reputation," unquote. It is ironic that during the Renaissance, when Italy was striving to regain the cultural and architectural status once held by Imperial Rome, led to the most widespread destruction of ancient monuments in order to repurpose the materials to build new monuments that paid homage to its ancient Roman heritage. The earlier medieval period saw relatively little such purposeful demolitions. This is a digital reconstruction of the temple as it was in the Renaissance times. We can see columns, entablature, pediments, and sections of the interior still preserved, and we can gauge its position next to the 2 remaining outer columns of the forum and compare it to the foundational ruins of the temple today. It gives a good realistic interpretation of what you would expect to see if you visited the Forum of Nerva today and the temple was still there. While the temple is gone, we can look to a section of Rome which is now a public archaeological park, just downhill from the Capitoline Hills. Walking right past the Theatre of Marcellus is the Portico of Octavia, which was first constructed by Quintus Metellus Macedonicus after his triumph over the confederation of Greek city-states known as the Achaean League in 146 BC. Augustus later refurbished the portico and the enclosed temples and rededicated it to his sister Octavia Minor sometime after 27 BC. While this wasn't a temple but a decorative main gate which enclosed the temples of Juno and Jupiter inside, its size and architectural similarity gives us a frame of reference of comparison to the Temple of Minerva, which would likely look similar had it not been demolished. Like the Temple of Minerva pre-demolition, it still retains most of its columns, entablature and pediments. Even the bricked archway is ancient, as it replaced two destroyed columns damaged by an earthquake in AD 442. Using our imagination, if we place the Portico of Octavia on the current foundational ruins of the Temple of Minerva, we can get a good estimate picture of what the Forum might look like had the Temple of Minerva not been demolished. Moving on to the Fontana Aqua Paola, otherwise known as the Big Fountain. It is a monumental fountain located on the Janiculum Hill, built in 1612 using the recycled marble remains taken from the Temple of Minerva. A massive gateway consisting of 5 arches allow for the arrival of clean spring water. So far the arguments have been stacked against Pope Paul V for destroying a well-preserved ancient temple to build a fountain. However, I present the other side of the argument. The aqueduct built by Emperor Trajan to provide clean drinking water to the residents of the Janiculum Hill had long been in ruins. The residents were forced to take their water from springs which were much saltier in content than proper springs, or from the polluted Tiber River. Pope Paul V decided to rebuild and extend the ruined aqueduct by imposing a wine tax, which he also used to purchase the rights of water from a nearby spring as the source of the fountain. The final destination of the water, travelling on the restored Trajan aqueduct, would be the new fountain, with an inscription poetically praising the Pope for bringing water to the residents of the district. 5 streams of water poured through the arches into 5 marble basins. In 1690, an extra semicircular pool was designed and added to collect water overflowing from the marble basin. Marble posts were installed to prevent coachmen from watering their animals inside the fountain. However, the pool attracted many local residents who used it for bathing. As a result, an ordinance was issued in 1707 forbidding residents from bathing in the fountain. Another issue that could possibly be raised is this. Was such an extravagant design using such costly materials like white marble, which could only be amply and efficiently supplied with the ruins of an ancient temple, necessary if we concede that the purpose of the fountain to provide clean drinking water was necessary? A common sentiment modern people like to apply to people from the Middle Ages is that they must have led a depressing life by living among the proof of such an immense loss of knowledge and civilization. And such reasoning can be sympathized by looking at the earlier drawing of small medieval settlements built inside the dilapidated Forum of Nerva. However, the surviving historical texts show no record of such insecurity by the early medieval residents of Rome regarding their classical past. A good analogy for why such lamentation or depressing life never happened is to consider why none of us today lament the loss of brutalist architecture, which, while technically massive and designed to inspire awe and progress, represents an outdated ideology that we would all like to move on from. After the fall of Western Rome, historians have contended a greater autonomy and slight living standard increase for rural peasants, serfs, and slaves. Today, no one really cares if such brutalist monuments are bulldozed and repurposed. However, the fountain was built in an age where such classical buildings and ruins had already gained appreciation from artists such as Raphael, and even earlier from the 12th century onwards, where the responsibility for protecting the ruins of the old Roman Forum went to Rome's senior magistrates known as the Conservatori. A simpler justification can be that earlier in the late 1500s, Pope Sixtus V also restored a ruined aqueduct and built a fountain marking the final destination of the water, known as the Fontana Aqua Paola, or Fountain of Moses, and that Pope Paul V also wished to embark on a similar public works program, restoring a water source with a fountain to rival the Fountain of Moses. Most importantly, both fountains achieved its political purpose, a statement of how the Catholic Church, unlike the Protestant Reformation, was serving the needs of the people in Rome, as well as in the case of the Fountain of Moses, achieving the social purpose of reviving the surrounding district, which had been a rustic area of villas, turning it into a thriving urban neighborhood by providing an ample source of clean drinking water. Even with these justifications, there is no doubt that the preservation of the ancient Temple of Minerva would have been a spectacular sight today, and it is normal to lament such loss. Both the fountain and the temple were built as public works programs. Is the fountain an adequate architectural replacement of the temple from which its materials it was built from? Does it invoke the same grandiose feeling? That is a subjective artistic question which each individual can decide for themselves.